Darkness enveloped the outskirts of the city of Greenville, Tennessee, USA. It was Sunday, April 6, 1997. The silence of the evening streets was shattered by sounds that were hard to mistake for anything else.
Gunshots.
Law enforcement officers immediately rushed to the scene, hoping that it was just a misunderstanding or someone hunting deer out of season. But what they saw would be forever etched in their memory. On the side of the road, in a shallow ditch, lay the bodies of 4 people: a man, a woman, and 2 small children. They were stacked on top of each other, as if someone had tried to hide the traces of a horrific crime. Blood was everywhere, and the acrid smell of gunpowder hung in the air. The police immediately called for backup and an ambulance, although they understood that for most of the victims, it was already too late. They carefully approached the bodies, trying to understand what had happened here. The family had been killed by gunshots. Law enforcement officers had never seen anything like this in all their years of service. Who could have committed such a brutal murder of an entire family, including innocent children? What evil had settled in this quiet town? While some officers tried to provide assistance to the wounded boy, others were already examining the crime scene in search of clues. Nearby, they found an abandoned car, an old blue Chevrolet. The doors were open, and the interior was in disarray, as if someone had been in a hurry to grab their things and flee. This was the first clue in an investigation that shocked all of America. Who were these mysterious killers? What drove them to commit such a heinous act? And would they be caught before they could harm other innocent people? Law enforcement officers were yet to delve into the dark world of religious fanaticism, drugs, and boundless cruelty. The investigation of this crime would become a real test for the entire city, and the shocking details of this case would haunt its residents for a long time to come. The story of the Lillelid family began far from the quiet town of Greenville, where their lives were so tragically cut short. The head of the family, Vidar Lillelid, was born in the small Norwegian town of Bergen. At the age of 20, he took a bold step, leaving his native home and heading to the United States of America in search of a better life. Vidar was the youngest of 4 children in his family. From a young age, he was known for his modesty, benevolence, and dreamy nature. The young man had always aspired to create his own happy family and provide them with a bright future. It was this dream that led him to Florida, where he hoped to start a new life. In the United States, fate brought Vidar together with Delphine, a girl who was born in March 1969 in New Jersey. A spark ignited between the young people, and they quickly realized that they were made for each other. The couple decided to move to Miami, and in February of the following year after they met, they got married. In 1991, the young couple welcomed their firstborn, a girl they named Tabitha. Vidar and Delphina were over the moon with happiness, but soon realized that the hustle and bustle of the big city was not what they desired. They dreamed of a peaceful life in a cozy town where they could raise their children in an atmosphere of love and security. That's how the Lillelids ended up in Powell, a suburb of Knoxville, Tennessee. It was a typical American town with picturesque scenery, friendly residents, and a measured pace of life. Vidar and Delphina felt they had finally found a place they could call home. In 1995, the family grew with another member, a boy named Peter. The Lillelids decided it was time to settle in a more spacious house where everyone would have their own room. They purchased a cozy little house built back in the 1940s and enthusiastically began arranging their new nest. Even though the house needed repairs, Vidar and Delphina spared no effort or time to turn it into a comfortable home. They dreamed of a happy future for their children and were ready to do anything for it. Delphina worked at a local restaurant and dedicated her free time to raising Tabitha and Peter. Vidar worked tirelessly to provide for his family. The Lillelids were deeply religious people and sought to raise their children in accordance with their beliefs. They regularly attended church and took an active part in the life of the religious community. In April 1997, the couple, along with their children, went to a large-scale convention of believers, hoping to strengthen their faith and find new like-minded people. None of them could have imagined that this trip would be fatal for them. that instead of the long-awaited spiritual unity, they would face the most terrible nightmare of their lives, and that their dreams and hopes would be mercilessly trampled by the cruelty that lurked very close by. While the Lillelid family was approaching their tragic fate, a completely different story was unfolding at the Columbia Motel, located near Knoxville. It was here that a company of young people from Kentucky, who were destined to become the perpetrators of a horrible crime, found refuge. The leader of this group was 18-year-old Natasha Cornett, a girl with a difficult past and a troubled psyche. With her were her best friend, 17-year-old Karen Howell, 20-year-old Joseph Reisner, 14-year-old Jason Bryant, 19-year-old Edward Dean Mullins, and 18-year-old Crystal Sturgill. All of them came from dysfunctional families where violence, alcoholism, and drug addiction reigned. From an early age, these teenagers experienced cruelty, neglect, and abuse from their closest relatives. Their souls were wounded, and their hearts were filled with pain and anger at the whole world. Natasha Cornett considered herself a servant of Satan and claimed to hear the voices of demons in her head. She dreamed of unleashing a kind of Armageddon and taking revenge on society for all her suffering. The girl managed to rally around her equally lost and embittered like-minded people who were looking for the meaning of life in the occult and violence. Together, they conducted dark rituals, used drugs and alcohol, and cut their veins in search of painful euphoria. The walls of their motel rooms were painted with pentagrams and satanic symbols. This company had completely rejected all moral and social norms, plunging into an abyss of hatred and cruelty. April 1997 became a point of no return for them. On the 4th, they checked into the Columbia Motel, intending to turn their perverted fantasies into reality. They had stolen weapons and money, preparing for their crusade against the world they hated. On April 6th, the same day the Lillelid family was returning from the Convention of Believers, Cornett's gang went out hunting. They were looking for victims on whom they could vent all their rage and evil. And fate brought them together with the Lillelids at the most tragic moment. When Delphina and her daughter came out of the restroom at the gas station, they accidentally ran into Natasha and Karen. The two girls in dark clothes and flashy makeup immediately caught the attention of the God-fearing mother. Delphina offered them religious brochures and invited them to an impromptu picnic, not realizing that she was talking to predators in human form. The members of Cornett's gang, seeing the Lillelids and their cozy family van, felt they had found the perfect victims for their twisted plans. An ominous idea hatched in their heads: to kidnap the family, take them to a deserted place and arrange a bloody massacre. They already saw themselves as ruthless avengers who would bring death and suffering to this world. No one present at that gas station even suspected what a terrible drama had unfolded in a matter of minutes. How behind the feigned friendliness and smiles lurked the darkest darkness of human hearts, and that an innocent family found itself at the epicenter of an insane nightmare that would forever change the life of a small town. When Natasha Cornett's gang joined the Lillelid family for an impromptu picnic, no one could have imagined the horrific plan that was brewing in their heads. Under the guise of feigned goodwill hid true monsters, ready to do anything for their perverted desires. Joseph Reisner and Jason Bryant were the first to approach the table where Vidar, Delphina, and their children were sitting. They struck up a casual conversation, trying to gain the trust of their future victims. At this time, Natasha and Karen were returning from the restroom, where they had last discussed the details of their sinister plan. Soon, Edward Mullins and Crystal Sturgill, who had been waiting in the car, joined the company. They brought with them the previously stolen weapons, 9mm and .25 caliber pistols. None of the picnickers even suspected that behind the backs of these young people lurked mortal danger. Suddenly, Joseph's friendly demeanor changed. He slowly pulled out a gun and pointed it at Vidar, ordering the entire family to stay put. At that moment, the Lillelid's world split into before and after. Fear and confusion gripped them as they realized they were in the hands of armed criminals. At gunpoint, the bandits forced the Lillelids into their own van. Vidar begged to at least let the children go, offering money and the car instead. But for Natasha and her henchmen, human life had no value. They were determined to see their bloody plan through to the end. Vidar himself took the wheel of the van with the armed Joseph sitting next to him, holding the man at gunpoint. The rest of the gang settled in the cabin, watching over the terrified hostages. Following the van into the unknown was the old Chevrolet, with Edward and Crystal inside. The atmosphere inside the van was tense to the extreme. Delphina tried to calm 6-year-old Tabitha, who was quietly sobbing, clinging to her mother. Little Peter, who was only 2 years old, did not yet understand what was happening, but felt the fear and anxiety of the adults. After a few kilometers, the van turned onto a dirt road and stopped in the middle of a deserted area. The bandits led the Lillelids out of the cabin, shoving them in the back with the barrels of their pistols. The family held hands tightly, whispering prayers and begging God for salvation. But nothing could stop the enraged fanatics who were ready to do anything for their perverted ritual. They roughly pushed the Lillelids apart and forced them to their knees. Vidar and Delphina desperately pleaded for mercy, promising to keep quiet about everything that had happened. But in the eyes of their tormentors, there was nothing but cold determination and sadistic pleasure. Shots rang out one after another, shattering the night silence and forever changing the life of the small town. The blood of innocent victims mingled with hot tears and screams of despair. And somewhere in the darkness, many miles from this terrible place, people were calmly going to bed, not even suspecting what tragedy had just occurred. The shots that rang out that terrible night forever changed the life of the small town of Greenville. The brutal murder of the Lillelid family came as a real shock to the entire community, which had never before faced such a display of violence and hatred. Thanks to the vigilance of a worker who heard the shots and saw suspicious activity on the deserted road, the police quickly arrived at the crime scene. But the picture that opened up before their eyes was forever etched in the memory of even the most experienced officers. On the ground lay the bodies of Vidar, Delphina, and their young children, bloodied and mutilated by numerous bullet wounds. Only 2-year-old Peter miraculously survived, despite severe injuries. The police immediately called an ambulance and began pursuing the criminals in hot pursuit. Thanks to prompt work and a lucky break, the bandits were apprehended at the Mexican border, where they were trying to escape in the stolen Lillelid van. 6 young people, Natasha Cornett, Karen Howell, Joseph Reisner, Jason Bryant, Edward Mullins, and Crystal Sturgill, stood trial on charges of kidnapping, armed robbery, and brutal murder. During the investigation and trial, they tried to shift the blame onto each other, making up nonsensical versions of events and accusing the youngest member of the gang, 14-year-old Jason, of everything. But all the evidence pointed to the fact that each of them played a role in this horrible crime. Even if not everyone directly pulled the trigger, they were accomplices who did nothing to stop the bloodshed. Under the pressure of irrefutable evidence and the threat of the death penalty, the criminals made a deal with the investigation. They pleaded guilty in exchange for life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. This verdict sparked outrage in the local community, which demanded the death penalty for the killers. But the law is the law, and the court made its decision. Meanwhile, little Peter, the only one who survived this terrible tragedy, was fighting for his life in the hospital. He underwent numerous surgeries and a long period of rehabilitation, trying to recover from physical and emotional wounds. The boy lost an eye forever, but kept the life that became both a gift and a burden for him. After his recovery, Peter faced another battle. His relatives on his father's and mother's sides were arguing over custody of him. In the end, the court decided that the boy should move to Sweden, to his aunt on his father's side. There, far from the scene of the tragedy, he was to get a chance at a new life and heal his emotional wounds. Years passed, but the residents of Greenville still could not recover from what had happened. Each anniversary of that terrible night was marked by a silent procession with candles and prayers for the repose of the souls of the dead. People tried to understand how this could have happened in their quiet town and what drove the young killers to commit such a heinous crime. The truth about the events of that night may forever remain a mystery, buried in the conflicting testimonies of the criminals. But the memory of the Lillelid family, loving parents and their young children, will forever remain in the hearts of the people of Greenville. Their tragedy became a reminder of the fragility of human life and how easily evil can creep into the most unexpected places. Many years have passed since that fateful day that forever changed the life of little Peter Lillelid. The boy grew up, overcoming the pain and suffering that had befallen him. He found the strength to return to the USA, to the country that had taken away his dearest people. Peter started his own family and built a successful career, trying to live a full life despite the burden of the past. He often thought of his parents and sister, dreaming of how proud they could be of him today. Every year on the anniversary of the tragedy, Peter would come to Greenville to honor the memory of his family and pray at their grave. He met with people who remembered his parents and thanked them for the support and sympathy they had shown all these years. Peter knew that nothing could bring back his lost family, but he also understood that the best way to honor their memory was to keep living, loving, and spreading light to those around him. He became a living symbol of hope and the indomitable human spirit in the face of the most terrible trials. And although the wounds on his body and soul would never completely disappear, Peter found the strength to forgive and let go of the past. He realized that revenge and hatred only destroy, and true strength lies in the ability to love and empathize, no matter what. Peter Lillelid's story has become a reminder to all of us that even in the darkest times, there is always room for hope and love, and that even the most terrible tragedies cannot destroy the strength of the human spirit if we do not allow evil to triumph in our hearts.